In 1908, Henry Ford did something that every business expert said was impossible. He announced that he was going to build a car so affordable that every working American could own one, and he was going to pay his factory workers enough money to actually buy the cars they were making. The business establishment called him crazy. Luxury car manufacturers laughed at the idea of mass-market automobiles. Labor leaders accused him of manipulating workers with false promises. Even his own investors threatened to pull their funding. But Ford had discovered something that would fundamentally change not just the automobile industry, but the entire structure of modern capitalism. Within 15 years, he had built the most profitable company on Earth, created the American middle class, and established manufacturing principles that every industry still uses today. Yet most people completely misunderstand what made Henry Ford's approach so revolutionary. Everyone knows about Ford's assembly line, but that wasn't his greatest innovation. Ford's real breakthrough was understanding that the relationship between production, efficiency, worker compensation, and consumer demand could create what he called virtuous cycle economics. This insight didn't just make him rich, it transformed the entire economic structure of the 20th century. The first principle that defined how Henry Ford worked was what he called systematic simplification. This wasn't just about making manufacturing more efficient. Ford believed that complexity was the enemy of both quality and accessibility, and he applied this philosophy to every aspect of his business. When Ford started the Ford Motor Company, most automobiles were essentially custom-built luxury items. Each car was different, requiring skilled craftsmen to hand-fit individual components. This approach meant that cars were expensive, unreliable, and available only to wealthy customers. Ford saw this complexity as an artificial barrier that prevented ordinary people from accessing transportation. His solution was radical: design one perfect car and build millions of identical copies. The Model T wasn't just a product, it was a philosophy. Ford stripped away every unnecessary feature, standardized every component, and optimized every manufacturing process around producing this single design as efficiently as possible. But Ford's systematic simplification extended far beyond product design. He simplified his supply chain by buying the raw materials instead of buying finished components. He simplified his workforce training by breaking complex assembly tasks into simple, repeatable steps. He even simplified his business model by eliminating the traditional dealer network and selling cars directly to consumers. The practical result was that Ford could produce cars faster, cheaper, and more reliably than any competitor. But the strategic result was that Ford had created a manufacturing system that improved automatically as volume increased, giving him an insurmountable competitive advantage. The second principle was what Ford called productive compensation. This was the idea that created the famous $5 workday, but Ford's reasoning was far more sophisticated than most people realize. In 1914, Ford shocked the business world by announcing that he would pay his workers $5 per day, more than double the standard industrial wage. Critics called it a publicity stunt. Economists predicted it would bankrupt the company. Other manufacturers accused Ford of disrupting the entire labor market. But Ford had calculated something that his competitors missed. If he paid his workers enough money to buy the cars they were making, he would create his own customer base. More importantly, he would demonstrate that mass production could support mass consumption, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of economic growth. Ford realized that the traditional approach of paying workers the minimum wage while charging customers the maximum price was economically self-limiting. Low wages meant small markets meant low production volumes meant high costs meant high prices meant small markets. It was a vicious cycle that kept entire industries trapped in luxury niches. Productive compensation broke this cycle by creating what Ford called purchasing power. When workers earned enough money to buy the products they made, markets expanded. Expanded markets justified higher production volumes. Higher production volumes reduced per-unit costs. Lower costs enabled lower prices. Lower prices expanded markets even further. The $5 workday wasn't generosity, it was strategic economics. Ford had discovered that paying workers well was the most profitable thing a mass production company could do. The third principle was continuous experimentation. Ford treated his entire operation as a laboratory for testing new approaches to manufacturing, management, and market development. Unlike most business leaders who implemented changes based on theory or intuition, Ford insisted on testing everything through direct experimentation. He would try new production techniques in small sections of his factory, measure the results precisely, and only scale successful experiments company-wide. This experimentation mindset extended to every aspect of his business. Ford experimented with different materials, different assembly sequences, different worker training methods, different supplier relationships, and different customer financing options. He treated each failed experiment as valuable data that eliminated approaches that didn't work. What made Ford's experimentation so powerful was his willingness to abandon successful approaches when better alternatives became available. Most companies get trapped by their own success, continuing to use methods that worked in the past, even when circumstances change. Ford constantly questioned his own success and looked for ways to improve approaches that were already working well. Here's what's most remarkable about how Henry Ford worked. He didn't just build a successful company. He created a template for industrial capitalism that dominated the global economy for the next century. Ford's systematic simplification became the foundation of modern manufacturing. His productive compensation philosophy created the consumer economy. His continuous experimentation approach established the principles of operational improvement that companies like Toyota and Amazon still use today. Modern entrepreneurs often focus on disrupting existing industries or creating entirely new markets. Ford proved that you can achieve extraordinary results by taking existing industries and making their products accessible to everyone instead of just wealthy customers. Ford worked by simplifying everything ruthlessly, compensating workers strategically, and experimenting continuously. He understood that the goal of business wasn't just to create profit for owners, but to create value for everyone involved in the production and consumption process. In an era of complex business models and sophisticated financial engineering, Henry Ford's principles remain surprisingly relevant. The companies that dominate today's economy, Amazon, Walmart, Tesla, all follow Ford's basic approach: systematically simplify operations, compensate stakeholders strategically, and experiment continuously to improve everything. The question isn't whether Ford's principles can work in modern business. The success of companies that follow his approach proves they can. The question is whether modern entrepreneurs are willing to prioritize systematic improvement over quick profits, strategic compensation over cost-cutting, and continuous experimentation over protecting existing advantages.